In this tutorial, we will talk about shallow inner thighs and large inner thighs. For the shallow inner thighs, one usually has very slender legs and extra fabric hangs in vertical folds near the upper thigh and the lower crotch area. That fabric needs to be removed. What you would do in the test garment is make a vertical tuck and pin out the excess fabric until the pant looks good. When you do that, make sure to pin both sides of the front equally so you know exactly how much fabric to remove. After consulting the fold on my test garment, I drew this shape on my pattern in exactly the same place I pinned it out on the test garment. I also established a pivot point along the crotch seam where I began pinning. Normally I would put another one down here where I stopped pinning, but I find it's much easier just to clip all the way in at this point. We will establish several other pivot points along the inseam stitching line and the lower crotch curve stitching line. The more pivot points you establish, the greater control you will have over the adjustment. Pivot points established, I will now cut in and along this side, the side closest to the inseam, I will cut along that line to my top pivot point. We are cut. Now I will cut over to all of these pivot points and in the seam allowance, so they truly are pivot points. Now what we'll do is slide this line over to our inner line, thereby removing this excess fabric. You will be happy that you have so many pivot points. Fabric has been removed. Everything is lying flat. I will secure. Don't worry about some of these spreading and others overlapping. It's fine as long as the stitching lines remain the same length. I will now true my seams. This doesn't really need to be trued at all. Down here, I think, just a little bit. The adjustment for shallow inner thighs. We will now move on to the large inner thighs. In this case, when the person stands still, the inner surface of the thighs will touch and they will rub together as the person walks. What is needed is an extended crotch point and more fabric on the top part of the inseam. Also, a straighter inseam because the inner thighs are very straight. Fabric is really tight across the upper inseam and forms tight horizontal wrinkles just below the crotch. The way to determine how much extra fabric is needed in the area of the inseam is to release this seam, allow the pant to hang comfortably, and insert fabric. I'm going to go ahead and cut this seam allowance completely off. Seam allowance removed. I will now extend the crotch point 1 inch on the back. This is done by just extending the crotch level line 1 inch. We have our new crotch point. Now for this figure type, usually there's quite a bit more fabric required here, all the way down to the knee. And then we can gracefully transition to no more fabric as we approach the base of the pant. To do that, and to do it nicely, I will make several clips into this seam allowance so that I can give the appropriate amount of fabric at the appropriate spot. I am clipped. I've extended my knee line also, just as an additional guideline. This is looking good to me. Yes, we have rounded out here, but that's because there's body here. And I do err on the side of caution. If we've added too much, we can always take it out. Our stitching line is the same length, except at the very bottom. We will clean this up. We'll be adding, looks like about a fat 1/8 of an inch. I will go ahead now and darken my new stitching line. We have our back ready. Now let's do the front. The front's a little different. We won't extend the crotch nearly as much, and the front inseam is already straighter, so the adjustment won't be as dramatic. Here's my pant front. I've gone ahead and cut the seam allowance completely off. The crotch extension for the front shouldn't be more than, just 25, maybe a little bit more than 25% of the back. So I'm going to come out here a fat 1/4. Remember, I extended the back 1 inch. If we had extended any more, we would have thrown off the ratio of back crotch extension to front, and we don't want to do that. I will go ahead now and make several cuts, but this seam is already fairly straight, so this will be easier. Here is our pant front. I'm going to go ahead and secure, then we will true the crotch curve. We have our back and our front. Remember, we did lengthen the back 1/8 of an inch at the base so that it would be plumb and at right angles. So we, in effect, lengthened the inseam of the back. We will remove that 1/8 of an inch right here at the crotch point. The length of this stitching line didn't change at all, so this needs to be lowered 1/8 of an inch. This is a very small amount, but small amounts add up, so be sure you do that. We have trued our inseams. There's one more thing I want to mention. If your leg is big all the way down to the base, you don't need to transition back at the base. You can keep the extra fabric that you've added up here. You could keep that below the knee as well, on both the front and the back. But that wasn't the case for this person. We just needed all this extra fabric above the knee. This is the large inner thigh adjustment.